Hello and welcome back to the Tudor Chess Podcast. This week I'm talking to historian and author Wendy Dunn all about Catherine Carey, the daughter of Mary Boleyn. Wendy has written a full-length biography of Catherine Carey and believes firmly that she was not the daughter of Mary Boleyn's first husband, William Stafford, but was, in fact, an illegitimate child of King Henry VIII. Wendy and I discuss Catherine's upbringing, her role at the royal court, whether there is any truth in the legend that she accompanied her aunt Anne Boleyn to the scaffold, and how she grew to be one of the most trusted and admired figures at the court of Queen Elizabeth I, who, following Catherine's death, granted her a funeral so lavish that it may well prove the theory that Catherine was not Elizabeth's cousin, but may very well have been her half-sister. Welcome back to the Tudor Chess Podcast, episode 66, Catherine Carey, Henry VIII's true daughter, with Wendy Dunn. So, welcome to the Tudor Chess Podcast, Wendy Dunn. How are you?
Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be here, Adam.
Very welcome. So we're here today to talk about your book, Catherine Carey, Henry VIII's True Daughter.
And thank you so much for reading it.
No, I mean, there's so little about her out there. So that's why I was, when I saw this book was out, I just thought, I must get that and dive in. And that's why I wanted to talk to you. So before we get into the discussion, though, about Catherine's remarkable life and story, just a few questions to get to know you a bit better, if that's okay. So can you provide me with a short intro into your background, where you grew up, the accent maybe is already a bit of a giveaway, and what you now do full-time?
I live in Melbourne, Australia, and that's actually where I was actually born. My father actually is a Cockney, or was a Cockney. He passed away quite a long time ago. So there's quite a strong connection in my DNA to actually my whole family, my mother's side as well, from the British Isles. I have more British blood than the royal family, but I think most British people can claim to that.
So was your dad born within the sound of Bow Bells?
Yes.
I'll see he was a proper Cockney.
He was actually born on the Dog of Isle, the Island of Dogs, or the Isle of Dogs.
Isle of Dogs.
Isle of Dogs, and he grew up in Poplar.
So yeah, I mean, if he's born within the sound of Bow Bells, that's the cut-off. That makes him a true, rather than a Londoner, it makes him a true Cockney.
That's correct. That's what I've been told.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're born, wherever you're born, if you can hear the sound of the bells at Bow, you're a Cockney as well as a Londoner. Whereas anyone that's outside of that, you're just a Londoner.
Anyway, my father loved history, and I think that's where it all started for me, because he was a great storyteller, and he used to tell us ghost stories when we were children. And I cannot remember a time in my life, I was trying to think of this the other day when I was reading through your questions, that I was not interested in history. In fact, I can remember as an 8-year-old being fascinated by the Egyptian history. I love ancient Greek history. I still do. And when I was 10 years old, I received, as a birthday present from a friend who obviously knew that I loved history, a book of stories about English history. And one of the chapters in that book was a chapter about Elizabeth I. And as she was known to have done in her own time, she just caught me heart and soul. And so really everything in my life has been thanks to that chapter. Well, all my writing, my adventure of writing, all the things that I've done has been because of the inspiration of her story, really.
Yeah, It's so interesting, isn't it? With for most people, the gateway drug for them into the Tudors is either Anne Boleyn or Elizabeth.
Yes,
More so than Henry, or it's normally either mother or daughter is the gateway drug, and then you just are in.
exactly. And of course, Elizabeth led me to Anne Boleyn. And both those women have been the inspiration of my life, really. So, yes, so, it was really good that I had that. Some things in life are meant to happen, and that definitely was meant to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've sort of answered my second question there, which is what sparked your passion for history. So to that end, if you could pick a single moment from history, you could sort of jump in a time travel machine, go back and see something, play out. What would it be?
I'd love to see the coronation of Elizabeth I. That would be what I'd love to watch. Such a moment of triumph, and really, just, yeah, I've written about it and I've imagined it. I would love to be there and see it for myself, even though it obviously was a cold day because it was snowing a bit, but I still would love to be there.
Yeah, my response is similar. Mine would be Anne Boleyn's coronation. But what I would love about something like the coronation of Elizabeth or Anne or whoever would be that ability to maybe sort of look around the room and go, oh, okay, based on portraits, like that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. Just, I think that would be fascinating.
Exactly. But I gathered that Elizabeth she actually scandalized people by the fact that she talked to people and took flowers of people. So I would be really wanting to grab her hand and say, and she'd be wondering why this person's speaking with this very strange accent.
Well, I mean, they had a very different accent then than we do now.
Of course they did. Yes, exactly.
Is there a Tudor misconception that you'd love to change?
I was thinking of that too. There's so many, really, when you look at it. I think the fact that there's a lot of people who believe, for whatever reason, that Anne Boleyn deserved to have her head chopped off. I mean, that's ridiculous. She was a political woman. She had moments that she wasn't a very nice person, but really, she was living on her nerves a lot of the time, and she did make efforts to reach out to Mary Tudor and make up, so, the fact that there are people still out there who believe that she deserved to have her head chopped off, that's, yeah, I'd like to have that sort of change. Yeah.
You said there about, she was living with intense nerves and everything. And I think that's why a lot of people really didn't like Claire Foy as Anne Boleyn. And I loved it. I thought Claire was amazing as Anne Boleyn in Wolf Hall. And the reason I loved her performance is that from the moment you meet her, you can tell this is a woman grappling with extreme imposter syndrome. She's totally terrified about falling. And I feel like that is how Anne Boleyn would have felt most of the time.
Oh, yes, for sure. Exactly. Yeah, she knew she had enemies, and it was not easy for her, especially when things changed after she married Henry VIII. Henry VIII wanted her to produce that heir, so she became not the woman that he loved, but the queen that had a responsibility to produce this child.
Yeah.
And of course, the first child happened to be Elizabeth. And then after that, she probably had, it looks like maybe 3 miscarriages.
At least 2, probably 3.
Yeah. It's just, and you think about the fact that when she was executed, that was only 4 months before. 4 months before that, she'd lost less time. It probably was less time than that she lost her last chance to give Henry
and it
that
was a
son.
male.
Yeah, exactly.
That flows beautifully, actually, into the conversation about Catherine Carey, because the first thing I wanted to speak to you about, actually, is a painting. It's called Anne Boleyn in the Tower. You start by discussing this painting at the start of your book. It's a painting that was made in the Victorian era, 1840s, I think. So it's,
Yes.
far from life.
Yes.
And it's the one where a woman is hiding her face and there's a younger woman on the ground, and it's called Anne Boleyn in the Tower. And I believe that this was kind of a big inspiration behind your desire to tell Catherine Carey's story. So how did you sort of go from that to that?
Well, actually, that painting has been responsible for so many words that I've written. I actually came across that painting decades ago. So it's been actually the inspiration behind my first novel. It's been the inspiration behind a play. It's been an inspiration behind my second Anne Boleyn novel. And of course, it ignited my desire also to continue telling Catherine's story. Because when you write fiction, you do a lot of research to do historical fiction work, but there comes a time when you just have to trust your imagination has drawn from enough historical research to tell a story. And this work, the non-fiction book, actually was making me look at the research and to actually prove. And it was one of the things that when I finished my second Anne Boleyn story, I did wonder, did I actually have enough research behind that book to really write a novel that said that she was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, I mean, not the daughter of Henry VIII. So the non-fiction book was quite scary in a sense because I was worried that it would prove, I wanted to prove in my mind that I was right, that Henry VIII had fathered Catherine Carey. But I was also really worried that I would find too much evidence to sort of make my work of fiction into a work of fantasy. So it was a worry, but I wanted to prove it. I wanted to investigate it in a more scholarly way and actually come out with an answer. Oh, gee, it was hard.
And something else that I picked up on is that you, like me, you mentioned that you believe that it's the woman hiding her face
Oh, yes.
that represents Anne.
Yes.
I've
Yes, exactly.
always looked at it that way, but most people look at it the other way around. And when I've talked about it on Instagram, people go, "Oh my God, I've never considered that. I've always just thought it was her on the ground." And I go, "Why? That person's clearly much younger. She's got long gingery hair that's some of it's in plaits. It doesn't make sense. It's clearly Anne Boleyn is clearly the one behind."
Yes, exactly. Well, when you look at it's a brilliant composition.
Yeah.
And I really admire the artist for how he did it because it's so suggestive of what, 'cause so many women, they're erased from history. There's so much we don't know. And so we have behind this younger woman, this woman who hides her face. And we know that really we don't know exactly what Anne Boleyn looked like. And the woman behind the younger woman is also wearing the headgear of a matron. And when you look at that woman's neck, it's a beautiful neck. It's that swan-like neck that we associate with Anne Boleyn. And then, of course, there's that badge that you can't really make out, but it's just that has that suggestion of the falcon badge that Anne Boleyn was known to wear. While the younger woman, she's actually lower than the woman behind her, which means that her rank is lower. And she's got, like you say, loose hair, which is actually in that time, if you're unmarried, if you're a virgin, you are still allowed to have your hair loose. And she's also wearing pearls, which is also symbolic of virginity. So, she is definitely younger than the woman behind her. Yeah, so when I looked at that painting, I felt that Anne Boleyn was behind her rather than the woman in front. That woman in front didn't really cry Anne Boleyn, while the woman at the back was so strongly, evocative of Anne Boleyn. And, I think if you are passionate about Anne Boleyn and know a lot about her, then it doesn't make sense for the woman in the front to be her.
It's funny, isn't it, when you notice certain things in portraits as well, and once you see it, you can't unsee it kind of thing. I mean, I remember last year I was looking at, the famous De La Roche portrait, the beheading of Lady Jane Grey.
Yes.
If you look very carefully,
Yes.
so the woman, there are a couple of women sort of with their faces against the wall behind her in sorrow. If you look really carefully, the woman to Jane's right, our left, is clearly wearing the dress Anne of Cleves wears in her famous portrait. If you zoom in, you can see the head, the headwear, the way the sleeve is cut. It's either meant to be Anne of Cleves for some reason, or it's just De La Roche decided to paint that person wearing Anne of Cleves' dress. But it's absolutely there.
I'll have to look at that painting. I never noticed that. I always look at, of course, the poor figure of Jane Grey, and my heart breaks.
Yes. And I promise we will get on to Catherine Carey, but one other thing about Anne Boleyn that I wanted to pick up on, because I was so pleased. We are slightly in the minority in that we're Team 1507.
I mean, maybe I don't want to have this argument definitely decided one way or the other, because it's such a fascinating debate between the two groups.
Everything I think about the reason why 1507 makes more sense, you said exactly the same things. The fact that Anne's age is never brought up by her enemies. The fact that Henry would have not wanted to marry a 32-year-old woman. By this, these things are just people overlook, and they're really important. And for me, add so much more weight to 1507.
Exactly. I mean, look, Catherine of Aragon had her last child at 32. She actually went into early menopause, which is not surprising considering that she did spend a lot of her 20s being pregnant and having horrible results because of those pregnancies, that is, having dead babies. So we can say a lot about Henry VIII, but we know he was a strong king, and it meant a lot to him, I believe, not to leave a civil war in his wake. And he may have loved Anne Boleyn, but I don't think he would have gambled on a woman of 32, even if she was pregnant at getting married, because he had such a terrible history of what happened in the birthing chamber with Catherine. It doesn't make much sense to me. And there's actually quite a lot of primary voices that speak of Anne Boleyn as being young. And that is very interesting too, don't you think? That we have those voices.
And we only have to look at the subsequent wives to also clearly see a pattern, maybe with the exception of Catherine Parr, but by that point the king is old himself. Jane Seymour is 26, 27, Anne of Cleves is 24. I'm talking about when they married the king. Catherine Howard could have been 15, 16,
exactly.
Probably more likely not about 19. But, there is a clear window that if you believe 1501, Anne Boleyn is totally outside of. And she is the one that Henry fought for so long. That alone makes 1507 so much more plausible.
Oh, for sure. And really, when you look at how things were done in that time, it was more older siblings were married first. So, of course, we have Mary being married in 1520. And then we have Anne Boleyn returning to England in 1522. So obviously she's been returned to be married off. And I believe, if I remember right, it was actually her Irish cousin that they were hoping to marry her off to with James Butler. So she would have been coming back as the younger sister, surely. And also we have that court case that was in the reign of Elizabeth I, when they were trying to sort out the properties that used to belong to the Boleyns and who had true ownership. And so there was some of the family, some of the Boleyns were saying, well, Mary was the older one, so therefore the property should have come to our branch of the family, not to Elizabeth. It was the younger, come from the younger sister. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff there, and I really do think we have to listen to the voices of the time. There's too many voices saying that she was young.
Yeah.
It's describing her
And follow the
young.
logic, you know. Follow the logic. I suppose the big thing that a lot of if you're our team 1501, it's that letter from France, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the thing people pin everything on. But we know Anne Boleyn was extremely intelligent. She could have just had very good penmanship despite her young age. There are ways of explaining that, but logic around her age and the fact that it's never mentioned, even by her enemies. Like Chapuis never mentions her age.
Exactly,
You know?
exactly. I agree. I agree. And that letter, she actually says in that letter that she blames her mistake and poor penmanship on the fact that this is the first letter that she had written by herself. Now, if she's 12,
No.
that couldn't be the case. She would have written other letters by that. So, so we're sort of with this letter. Um, I don't know. I mean, the thing is that I have actually seen examples of letters written by, I think there's one by a king, I think one of the Georges. And when I looked at that letter, this is a letter that he wrote when he was 7 or 8. And I'm looking at the penmanship of that letter and thinking, well, if he's writing like that and Anne Boleyn's letters, like what we can see,
Mm,
it's similar. And I have a very intelligent grandson who's just turning 8. He's got
yeah.
really good handwriting, far better than mine. So, I don't think we can make a judgment
Mm,
call on the penmanship. Children are very unique and very different. And I was actually a primary teacher for many years, and I saw many children very advanced in what they were able to do, what you wouldn't have expected at that particular age. So I don't think we can make that call on that letter.
So Catherine
Mm,
Carey, so her
mm,
mother is Mary Boleyn, who, as we've
yeah.
said, very, very likely the older sister of Anne Boleyn. And like Anne Boleyn, Mary would spend time in Europe as a young woman. But when she returned to England, she returned under something of a dark cloud. What had happened to Mary while she was in France?
There's a lot that we don't know what happened exactly. I mean, even when I was reading, doing my research, there's a lot of conflicting information, but it does appear that something did happen. And I actually felt so, so sad for poor Mary because what I
Mm,
think happened, and of course, like I say, this is me reading through what we do have, reading between the lines. It appears that maybe the French king took advantage of poor Mary, and Mary would have been very young. And then after that, just basically bragged about it to everybody. And so, because of the fact that he obviously, it appears that he took her virginity, and of course, for a woman, a girl of her rank, it was very important for her to not be spoiled goods. She needed to
mm,
keep her virginity. Once you lose your virginity, you lose your selling point for your family. Yeah, and a woman's virtue in that time was very important to be kept, and you never really recovered from doing something like that in that particular time. So I do think that he just basically used and abused and discarded her. That's what I believe happened. So I feel very, very sad for her.
yeah, and you mention in the book that you think that there's a chance that actually Mary's damaged goods reputation sort of preceded her and may have been the impetus behind Henry VIII then pursuing Mary. Can you explain that to me?
We know Henry VIII, don't we? he always wanted to outdo people. And he really, really wanted always to outdo the King of France or whatever. So I think psychologically, if he knew that a woman at his court had been bedded by King Francois in France, then he would have wanted to have her in bed with him and to have her say to him, "Oh, you did it so much better than the king in France." So, I think that would have been one of the things is if he knew that she had been sampled by the French king, he would have liked to have sampled her too and proved that he was, better in the bed chamber than the French guy. So, and she, of course, Mary was a woman who was attractive, I'm sure, and actually far more intelligent than what we give her credit for. So he probably enjoyed her company and continued to have her warm his bed for him. So, yeah.
What information do we have available that allows us to date Henry VIII's relationship with Mary Boleyn, if at all?
Yeah, well, she was married off in a rush in 1520, which was quite interesting. We have Henry VIII's mistress, Bessie Blunt, having her child, Henry Fitzroy, in 1519, I think it is. And it's in that particular period of time, if a woman was pregnant in the upper classes, it was not encouraged for sex to continue in a marriage until the baby had been born and the woman had been churched, because it's in that time it was regarded that sexual intercourse was for producing children. So it was frowned upon. Not to, I mean, I'm sure it did continue in lots of relationships, but it definitely was not encouraged. And the king didn't usually sleep when his wives were obviously very pregnant. He had a habit of seeking out another woman, a mistress, to take the place of his wife or mistress in place when they're pregnant. So it's possible that when Mary returned from France in 1518, then that he decided that she would be the woman to replace Bessie Blunt. And then he may have decided to marry her off, I believe, to William Carey, because he just wanted to make her a married woman just in case there were any children resulting, or he just wanted to conclude the relationship at that time. But it appears that after their marriage, the relationship did resume. It appears that they had a relationship for about 2 years, which is really a long time for Henry.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that people often conflate, mostly down to the other Boleyn girl, is this: people have this feeling that Mary and Anne were sort of crossing over, but they was actually, by the time Henry didn't even notice Anne Boleyn until 1525, 1526, there's a big gap between his affair with Mary for however long it lived and him finally turning his eyes on her younger sister. Unlike what the other Boleyn girl shows us, this was not a sisters fighting it out over the king at all.
I actually don't. I mean, this is the thing, is people don't. I mean, there are people who do understand that what happened with Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn was a situation of power. When he did turn his gaze to her and decide to that he wanted to have her in his bed, and the relationship with Mary was maybe waning, or he was losing interest in Mary at that point. But of course, Anne wouldn't be interested in jumping into the bed of a man who's just been sleeping with her sister. I mean, and for years she tried to. I mean, initially she really struggled really hard to keep him in his place. But how do you keep a man like Henry VIII in his place? It's impossible.
So, as you've referenced a couple of times, in 1520, Mary Boleyn is married. She's married to a man called William Carey. Who was William Carey? You know, what was did he have a role at the court of Henry VIII? I think him and the king were actually distantly related as well.
They were through the Beaufort family. So they were third cousins, but William was actually he wasn't from a rich family, that's for sure, but he was obviously employed by the king because of his relationship, his kinship to the king. He was the gentleman of the Privy Chamber, and he was also esquire of the body. So that means that he was in close contact with the king at all times. So that's why I feel that he was in the position to be married off to one of Henry's mistresses, or just the woman that's slept with him.
Mary falls pregnant, and we know Catherine Carey comes along. Is there anything that enables us to pinpoint roughly when she was born? You reference a ship as potential evidence, for example.
Yeah, he named a ship Mary Boleyn. And as we know, Henry VIII prided himself on his ships. I don't believe he would have named a ship Mary Boleyn other than the fact that there was something really exciting. You know, that she was pregnant, and he wanted to celebrate that pregnancy in some way. So not only was that she was someone sleeping with him, but also bearing his child. So I believe that points to her pregnancy. And also early in the following year, more rewards came the way of William Carey, which is also very interesting as well. So, yeah, those sort of things point to me that was the point of Catherine being on the way and being born.
Yeah.
The ship being named Mary Boleyn and the rewards the following year. So, yes.
That's sort of the big part of this conversation has to be around Catherine's parentage. You state very early on, and it's in the title of the book, that you believe Catherine was the daughter of Henry VIII and not William Carey. Firstly, can you walk me through, I suppose, your key pieces of evidence to support this? And then by extension, a question that I would also I'm curious to know is, if she was, why Henry VIII didn't acknowledge her? Is it purely down to sex? Because he freely acknowledged Fitzroy, but he was a boy. So maybe explain, do you want to maybe explain the evidence first? But I'm just curious to see both sides.
No, I think I'll explain the evidence first, because the other one's it's more difficult to, I wonder about that as well. But anyway, with the evidence, after the execution of Anne Boleyn in 1536, the court of Henry VIII was not a good place to be a Boleyn. And I do see Catherine Carey as a Boleyn, because, of course, the Carey family was lower in the hierarchy of the Tudor world than what the Boleyns had been, with the fact that they had Anne Boleyn on the throne as queen. So after 1536, things changed for the Boleyns. It was a very dark time. So to be of that bloodline was not a good thing. Yet we can see that that never impacted upon Catherine's advancement at court. In the time when to serve one of Henry's queen was highly sought after position, and it was. People paid out bribes, and there was only a few positions available to be that close to one of King Henry's queens. Catherine was selected to be a maid of honour, and there was only 6, if I remember right. There was only 6 maid of honours to Anne of Cleves. So that was a very sought after position. And that's really, really interesting that that happened because she was the daughter of Mary Boleyn, obviously the niece of Anne Boleyn, but that did not matter. She became selected for this really, really very, very sought after role. And when she was married in her teens, she was actually only a maid of honor for a short time before she married her husband, Francis. She was actually given joint ownership of the property granted to her and her husband, which
Mm.
is really quite interesting because she's still in her teens and she's given joint ownership. And this was done through an act of parliament. And then, of course, we have Francis being made Master of the Horse for Prince Edward. Um, you couldn't be any more closer to a royal person than to be the master of their horse. And this is Prince Edward, the very precious son of Henry VIII. So Francis obviously was very trusted by the king, and also it feels almost like a family sort of maneuver. You know, this is the husband of my unacknowledged daughter here. I'll make him the master
Mm.
of the horse of my son. Uh, so, and then we have after their return, and this actually made me very excited when I found this out. When Francis and Catherine returned from exile in 1558, when Elizabeth became queen, Elizabeth allows the family, Catherine and her family, to live at Reading Abbey, what remained of Reading Abbey, because that property has centuries of royal history and connection. It even had a tomb of Henry I there. I mean, this was a very, very loved royal place that people over the centuries. Henry VIII went there, loved it. He actually updated the stables there. Anne Boleyn and Henry visited Reading Abbey a couple times. So it was a really, really precious accommodation place. A lot of, like I said, a lot of history connected to
Yeah,
the
it
royal
it
family.
does it does seem like she's getting they were getting opportunities that just seem at odds with ostensibly a couple who were quite minor members of the nobility if we
Exactly,
consider that,
exactly.
you know?
They were very trusted. They were in the that very close circle of trusted people. And as we know, for Elizabeth, took a lot to gain her trust. But once you were in that
Mm,
group, yes, yes, she really wanted people around her that were loyal, and also the blood kinship was always also something that was also very important to Elizabeth to be
mm.
around with her kin, her cousins and everything.
Yeah, I mean, you really see that Elizabeth, and that's again, it's a real indicator of Elizabeth's love for her mother's memory and the Boleyns is that
Oh,
she surrounded herself with
oh,
Boleyns,
for sure, for sure. It makes
you know?
me actually. It was when you look her death. She actually died, I believe, in the arms of one of her Carey cousins. I think it was Robert. Was Robert. So there was all these Careys around her on her deathbed
Mm,
as well. Because of course the
yeah.
Careys, both Henry and Catherine, both of them had huge families. At least Henry sort of missed out on the birthing chamber, but he produced, I think, 14 children, if I remember
Mm.
right.
This is
And
Henry Carey, Catherine's younger
Henry
brother.
Carey, yeah, yeah, yes, yes. So there was a lot of Carey kin around Elizabeth from the start of the reign to the end of her reign.
Mhm.
They were a very important part of her court. And of course, we have that portrait. that is supposed to be, I mean, it hasn't been 100% identified as Catherine Carey, but we have enough evidence to feel that, yes, it is Catherine Carey. It's a portrait that shows a woman dressed in the colours of a woman attending Elizabeth I. That is, that usually they wore black as being their colour, while Elizabeth wore other colours to stand out. But her clothes, I compared her portrait to the portrait of the wife. Oh, what's her name? Oh,
Cecil.
yes, exactly.
Mildred Cecil. She looks about 80 in that portrait.
Yeah, I know she does, doesn't she? An intellectual woman she is. Catherine's portrait shows a woman in really rich garment. You know, her clothes are just absolutely gorgeous. And also the embroidery is in gold. And you look at that portrait, you can see the hair color, the eye color, the bone structure, the beautiful hands, all the things that are so similar to the Tudor bloodline. It just, it just cries out. This is someone very close to Elizabeth's bloodline, especially the hands and the bone structure. It's just amazing.
And you pointed out, actually, and I'd never noticed it, but after I read your book and you point out the close similarity in the face between that and the Hughes Van Cleve of Henry VIII, it is absolutely there. You can clearly see a clear correlation.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it almost felt, when I looked at that portrait of Henry VIII and looked at the portrait of Catherine, that it was deliberate, that she knew that portrait of Henry VIII, and she wanted to make some sort of statement. I'm going to stand like my father, and I'm going to let people see the similarity between me and him. So it's quite extraordinary when you look at that.
Yeah, and that was done as well in the early days of Elizabeth I's reign. There's a portrait of Elizabeth. I'm sure you've seen it. There's a portrait of her at Hever Castle. It's totally face on, and it looks nothing like the rest of Elizabeth's portraits. Really, the face is much bigger, and it's conjectured that it was done deliberately to make her look like her father.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. We've got another example. If I had known about that, I would have included that in the book. But that's it. Maybe we should see if there's other examples of that, because that's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because paintings in those times, there was a lot of symbolism happening and hidden meanings going on, and they liked presenting us with puzzles to work out in the future.
Well, and especially Henry and in particular Elizabeth were so, they created a version that they wanted painted rather than just how they looked, particularly Elizabeth. So it makes it all the harder. So to go back to what I was asking about, why Henry, if she was his daughter, why Henry didn't acknowledge her? And do you think it does simply come down to gender, or what's going on there?
The mess of it all. I think that's what it was. He didn't actually deny that he had a relationship with Mary Boleyn. He
proved it, didn't he, when he was asked about if he slept with Elizabeth Boleyn as well?
Exactly. Never with the mother. Not with the mother. Oh, because there was a horrible rumor going around that Anne Boleyn was the daughter of Henry VIII. Oh my goodness. But he annulled his marriage to Anne Boleyn on a pre-relationship with Mary. So he didn't deny that he had a relationship, but I think the thing is that it would have been just too messy with regards to, the family relationships and stuff. And he had married her off to William Carey. Of course, that would mean that there would have been always a question mark over the children anyway, because she had a husband.
So do you think that there's a lot more chance that she was the daughter of Henry VIII than Henry was the son?
I actually believed that it was only Catherine who was sired, but because the relationship appears to between Mary Boleyn and Henry VIII petered out by the time that Henry was born. Yet, when I was writing the book, there seems to be quite a lot of evidence. Like, for instance, the one thing that sort of really was quite interesting, Francis, the husband of Catherine, suggested his nephew George as a possible husband for Mary, Queen of Scots. So that was sort of like the thing that really made me sit up. There was other things as well, because there's people of the time that pointed to Henry Carey and said that this is the son of Henry VIII.
Yeah, because why would you propose him in marriage to Mary, Queen of Scots, unless he had some royal blood?
Exactly. That was the thing that made me really, really think, what does Francis know that we don't know? It would have been offensive to be suggesting my nephew, George, my nephew, who doesn't have any associate, or has very, 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 very thin. All the people at court had some relationship to Edward III, because Edward III had so many children, and I think everybody in England probably have a bloodline that goes to Edward.
There's actually a mad statistic. I think it's something like 88% of all Britons descend from William the Conqueror. I mean, it's wild.
Yes. And supposedly one branch of my family may be descended from that branch too, but I can't unravel the knot, and I haven't got the time or energy to do it. And
we've got quite a cool family link, and it ties us into the Boleyns, but not for good reasons. So we discovered that my time 16 grandfather was a man called Sir William Pennington, and he was murdered in a church in Westminster for speaking out against the Boleyn family. And it was actually portrayed in The Tudors, the TV series. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And he's my time 16 grandfather. It's one of the few things I liked about The Tudors. So Mary loses her first husband and has a clandestine second marriage that infuriates the Boleyn family. Mary's banished from court, and although it can't be proven beyond doubt, there's a good possibility, and you argue that it's certainly feasible, that Catherine Carey at that point entered the household of her aunt, Queen Anne. So what allows you to land on this conclusion?
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, Anne Boleyn was also the guardian of Henry Carey. And if Catherine's mother is no longer on the scene, it appears that Mary Boleyn and her husband ended up in Calais. So Catherine was of an age to go into service. What better place for her to go into service than of her aunt, who's the Queen? I mean, what other place would it be? Or the other place I thought that could have been possible is in the household of her uncle George. So, and of course, her uncle was also part of the court.
Yeah.
So either way, she would have been in that circle, that court circle of people floating around. Records in this time are really, really all over the place. There's so much that hasn't been documented, that's missing for us. And especially if a person isn't perceived to have any importance. Catherine Carey was not regarded as a person of importance to document. So we don't know her location. We don't know when she was born. There's so much murky unknown, and so much unknown about her early life
Yeah.
that we can only work out by the things that the normal way of doing things in that particular time. And her rank would mean that she would have gone into service somewhere. And
Well, especially if her brother was already there, like it does make sense.
exactly. He was actually at Sion, being educated, but that's close enough to Richmond and everything. And
And it was under Anne's control, right?
exactly. While Catherine, she would have been in need of, to be put into service in that time for Catherine, a person of Catherine's rank, is to be put into a kind of finishing school, to be trained to be a woman ready to take her place as a wife and someone looking after household and everything. So, what really, really made my heart sing is to the realization, because Mary, after the death of William Carey from the English wet, Mary returned home to Hever Castle. So she would have taken Catherine with her to Hever Castle. So
Mm.
to know, Catherine probably would have known Hever Castle before that, but to know that she would have lived with her mother at Hever Castle for a few years as a child, it really made my
Mm.
heart sing, because, of course,
Yeah.
Hever Castle has the association with Anne Boleyn as well.
Yeah, it's Berlin Mecca, isn't
Oh,
it? I
no,
mean,
I know. So, yeah, because Hever Castle is one of my most favourite places on earth. And
it's beautiful.
mm,
I had the total thrill of staying overnight for 2 nights in September as part of the tour company that I run, and it was amazing because we had a banquet in the Great Hall, and it was just wonderful. It
oh,
was remarkable, and
oh,
we got
Adam.
taken on a hidden Heaver tour where you get to see the rooms that aren't normally open, and yeah, it was remarkable. So, Catherine being potentially in the household of her aunt, Queen Anne, maybe then adds weight to the legend, and it is just a legend. There's no irrefutable proof that Catherine actually accompanied Anne Boleyn to the scaffold in 1536. What is your feelings on that? Do we know the earliest documented comment that she was there? Like, where does that come from?
It's actually about 200 years ago. Some historian wrote it. Alison Ware mentions it in The Lady in the Tower.
Yeah.
So it's probably from the early Victorian times. I find it intriguing because there's lots of examples in history that where there is smoke, we do find fire. Like the legend of Troy is something that comes down quite. There's always a legend that there was the city of Troy being this particular area, and no one really believed it, and yet. Couple hundred, or was it about 150 years ago, they discovered, yes, that this was the site of Troy. So there's other
Mm.
examples of that in history where we have smoke, and then when we examine deeper, we actually establish that there is truth to that story. So it is a legend, like you say, but I think that it's quite interesting that we even have that legend.
Mm.
And the
Because
fact that
it's quite a specific legend, that it could have been any young girl, but it being the Queen's niece
niece,
is
that's
quite
right.
specific. And to your point, it's like all legends have a basis in truth and fact, so it's entirely feasible.
That's right. It is really intriguing. When I actually came across that story a long time ago, because my first Anne Boleyn novel came out, my God, was it 2002? Oh, girl. Oh, such a long time ago. So I came across that legend when I was researching that book, but I actually felt the same as Alison Ware when I looked at it more. I felt like, I actually looked at it because I thought, oh, this is really interesting. Could it have any basis in truth? And then I looked at Catherine Carey even more. And in that period of time, there was even more scatty knowledge about Catherine. And there was even a birth year of 1530 given for a birth. So there was, I had birth years of 1526, 1530, and it's just, no, doesn't make any sense, This is, 22 years ago. So I actually thought, and when I thought that, putting a 12-year-old on the scaffold, I thought, nah, because being on the scaffold as a witness to someone's execution was a huge responsibility. You wouldn't want someone there who was likely to be a mess or burst into tears or whatever, because you're supposed to be there to support the person who's dying, making certain they make a good death. So how could a 12-year-old be trusted to stand there and watch someone that they know being killed? So I felt the same as Alison, where Catherine was too young. I just put that away, pushed it away. I thought, nah. But then when I was looking into it even more, this is many years later, and with more knowledge on how the Tudors lived. The more that you research and gain knowledge about the past, is the realization that it's so true that the past is a foreign country. They do things differently. For the Tudors, to be a 12-year-old girl is to be old enough to be married. And of course, we've got examples of poor Margaret Burford, who had her first child at 13. It's, and you also got the example of when Elizabeth I died, one of the people who were part of the Death Watch. The Death Watch was a ritual that they did to ensure that a person was really dead, was a 13-year-old girl. And so, you think to yourself, well, they are doing things a lot differently to what we would do things today, but that's the lifespan then was less than 40, the average lifespan. So life was lived very fast in that particular period of time. And
it's why I make a real habit of well, not a habit of, I try to the best of my ability to not psychoanalyze Tudors, because we are talking about people who lived 500 years ago, believed very, very firmly in heaven and hell, God, the devil. We cannot claim we can get inside the head of a Tudor and understand them. We can't.
Oh, for sure. That's right. Their mindset was completely different. And I actually sometimes think that their mindset was a lot richer than ours, because they were open to so much. When I'm actually researching at the moment Dr. John Dee, and he spent a lot of time talking to spirits.
I take it his code name?
No? Well, tell me.
You not know this? So obviously Dr. John Dee was, Elizabeth I's astrologer and a part-time spy master. His code name in letters to her was 007.
Oh, you're kidding. No, I haven't heard of that. So where did you find that information?
It's actually quite a well-known Tudor tidbit. I can't remember where I heard it, but it's absolutely true. He signed his letters off. His code name was 007, so it must surely, that's too much of a coincidence. Ian Fleming must surely have been aware of that, because it's just too much of a coincidence. But yeah, it was his code name.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's remarkable. Like you say, though, what a Renaissance figure that person was. He was a scientist, he was a mathematician, he was, like you say, a spy master. He was 007.
We've touched on the marriage of Frances Knollys. So, firstly, was this considered a good match? And then you also mentioned they had a lot of children. I think she was pregnant at least 16 times. of which many reached adulthood, which was very unusual. Was the marriage a good one? Where did they primarily reside, if we know?
When you asked the question when, whether he was considered a good match, that really got me thinking. He was knighted by the time he married Catherine. He was definitely close to the king and trusted by the king. He wasn't at that point made a master of horse to the prince, but he was definitely part of that group of people that were close to the king. He came from a family that actually had a long history of loyalty to the Tudors. His grandfather was actually in service to Prince Arthur. I think we can see this as a good match because he was respectable and like I say, he came from this good family. And they married when she was either 16 or 18, depending on which year of birth we go with. There's two strong cases for either the 24 birth year or the 22. So either one or the other we can go with. I go with the 24, 1524, early 1524. So that means that she would have been 16 when she married, and she started having her babies straight away. In her first years of marriage life, she had a baby every year. They lived at the house that I mentioned before, the one that was granted to them by Act of Parliament as joint ownership, the Rotherfield. I think that's it. That's the name of it, if I remember right. So Rotherfield Greys. And they also purchased a property at Reading, which makes me think that's why, they were happy to get the Abbey because they obviously enjoyed living at Reading. Reading was closer to London than the other property, but they were mostly based at the Rotherfield Greys property during their first years of marriage. I don't think she spent very much time at court during those first years of marriage because, like I say, she was pregnant a lot.
Yeah, 16 pregnancies at least, right?
Oh, yeah. And like I say, in the first years of marriage, it was a child every year.
Yeah.
It was just, it just staggers me. And as you mentioned, most of those children survived to be adults and also to have lots of children. So Catherine has a lot of descendants in the world. I know a few of them. I'm very envious of my friends who are descendants of Catherine. I wish I was too. Maybe one day we'll find out that I am. It would be lovely. I would love that. And that would mean, and I'm a descendant from Henry VIII. I don't know. Maybe I'll back away from that. I don't know if I really want to be a descendant of Henry VIII.
Yeah. Did you see the wonderful episode of Who Do You Think You Are with the British comedian Josh Widdicombe?
Yes, I did, and he has the red hair of the Tudors.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
That was yes, I did watch that episode. Yeah. But like I say, there's so many descendants of Catherine because of the fact that she had all those children, and a lot of them also had rather large families.
So at what stage did a close relationship between Catherine and her cousin / possible half-sister, Elizabeth, begin to blossom? Because it comes across that they were quite close from quite a young age.
I know. There was 10 years difference in their ages. Yeah, or 11 years a difference that Catherine was senior over Elizabeth. It's quite interesting that Ware and Bowman, actually, when I finished my second Anne Boleyn novel, I wanted to ended on a happier note. So I have Catherine swearing loyalty to the child Elizabeth, who's only 3 years old, and saying, I'm going to go into the household Elizabeth and stay with her. And both Ware and Bowman also suggest that this is what happened to Catherine after the execution of Anne Boleyn, is that Catherine actually entered the household of Elizabeth before her marriage. I mean, before she entered the service of Anne of Cleves, and then, of course, had her marriage not that long after that time. So that really, I was really happy to hear that Ware and Bowman also felt as me that that was where Catherine was, in the household of Elizabeth after the execution of Anne. And also, we have the letter that Elizabeth wrote to Catherine when Catherine obviously wrote her a letter telling her about the plans to go into exile. In that letter, Elizabeth speaks about their long relationship. So she speaks about it in Latin terms or in mythology terms or whatever, but she talks about the fact that their relationship was definitely of a long nature.
Because I was about to ask you, how did Catherine fare? I mean, presumably during the reign of Edward VI, better, but under Mary, based on what you've just said, she has to flee the country essentially.
Yeah, well, Frances was actually, according to one of the resources that I came across when I was researching True Daughter, Mary actually hated Francis. Francis was a very firm Protestant. He was a Puritan. Definitely more Puritan than Catherine was. I can't see Catherine being as Puritan as her husband. Otherwise, Elizabeth would not have loved her. Oh, well, she would have loved her, but she wouldn't have put up with her as much as because Francis and Elizabeth had a few moments of not liking one another much. But Mary definitely hated Francis because she saw Francis as being one of the people responsible for her son, her brother, who was a godson, being a Protestant, and therefore she would have saw Frances as being responsible for her brother, who she did love, and also Edward did love his older sister as well. She would have seen that, thought that Edward would have ended up in hell for the fact that he was Protestant. And so she did hate Francis as one of those men who was a bad influence upon her young brother. And so when Mary became queen, Francis obviously recognised that he needed to find an escape route, that his time around Mary would be of a short duration. It's interesting that I actually felt when I was reading, because the letter that Elizabeth wrote to Catherine has a date. It's dated 1553, which is on the year that Mary became queen. But I don't believe they actually left England until 1555.
Okay.
Because it takes a while for because Francis actually went across to Europe, and he was sorting out to see where they could go. So he went across, and there's also another example of Catherine Willoughby's husband also doing the same thing. That was Robert Beatty, going across to Europe to find out where they could be before coming back and collecting his family and then taking everybody across. And I have in my family history, I have a similar. When I think there's so many people could tell you that, my uncle, my father went across to a country just to find out where they could be, then came back and brought the whole family across. Because you don't just take your wife and so many children and not know if there's a house to be in, and or that there will be
what the lay of the land is and all that stuff.
Exactly. So they went and did that first. He set up his networks of people in Europe and in Germany, and then came home, and Catherine had another baby, so that wouldn't have been a good time for them to go. And then after a few months, they left, I believe, at the end of 50-55.
So 3 years later, Elizabeth ascends the throne, and with her ascendancy, Protestants that had fled into Europe began to return to England. So how quickly was Catherine recalled, essentially, to enter into the service of Elizabeth, and what role did she play by Elizabeth's bedside and by her side?
I don't even think she was recalled. I think as soon as they got the news that Elizabeth had ascended the throne, they just packed up and came home, because they knew
First boat out.
they knew that the welcome would be there. I mean, as soon as Catherine was with Elizabeth early in 1559, helping her prepare for the coronation. She was there for the coronation. She was already vowed in service, because the women who served Elizabeth, they also had a vow of obedience and service to their monarch as well before being officially in that role. And that happened just prior to Elizabeth's coronation, which of course was on the 15th of January, 1559. And she served as one of the 6 women in Elizabeth's bedchamber. So she was one of the women in the bedchamber. She actually became the mistress of these women in 1565 when Ashley died, to Elizabeth's heartbreak. So, but of course she didn't have many years left of her life after 1565.
So which leads to my next question, which is, how did Catherine spend her final days?
It appears she was ill for months, and I believe she may have had some sort of condition even for years. She, at the wedding of her son in 1565, we have Elizabeth sending her doctor to Catherine because Catherine's ill, but she obviously rallies. But I kind of wonder if I've had 4 children in my life, and I know what physical cost that has done to me. Catherine had 16 kids, so that's a lot for a woman's body to go through. That would probably have left her a lot physically weakened for all the things that were around in that period of time. It's very possible that she may have had that form of malaria that was common in the Tudor times, and I think that is what killed her at the end. She was suffering from high fevers for a long period of time that they couldn't obviously get rid of, and finally she passed away at Hampton Court Palace on the same day that celebrated the Elizabeth becoming Queen of England.
It's quite poignant, really, that she died at Hampton Court Palace. I mean, that's, so synonymous with the Tudors, and 10 years to the day of Elizabeth's coronation.
Elizabeth regarded Hampton Court as being a very unlucky place. That was where she was. She came down with smallpox. So she regarded it. She actually was. It was a place that she avoided.
Well, there's also with Elizabeth and Hampton Court, there was the whole thing with Margaret Douglas. I don't know whether you've ever heard this story about Margaret Douglas and her apartments at Hampton Court. She deliberately had them noisily renovated because they were directly over where Elizabeth was being held.
Yes, I've heard
what
that
a bitch.
Story. No, it was definitely obviously another thing to reinforce her dislike of of Hampton Court Palace, which I think is lovely. But actually, it's interesting that she stayed at Hampton Court, which sort of suggests to me, because one of the things is that Catherine wanted to go to her husband, who she did really love. Francis was stuck so far away guarding Mary, Queen of Scots. He was absolutely desperate too to return to his wife. He couldn't understand why he was stuck there when another person could do the job just as well as him. But Elizabeth obviously felt that we know Mary, Queen of Scots, could be a troublemaker, and maybe Elizabeth just felt that Francis was the best person there to keep an eye on things and ensure that things were going smoothly. And she also, I think, probably believed that Catherine was in the best place with her, and the fact that they were still at Hampton Court maybe indicates that Catherine was definitely too far gone to be moved anywhere, too ill to go to her husband, too ill to go any other place other than where she was staying. And I think she was also in denial that Catherine was dying, because Elizabeth had a great confidence in her ability to be able to. She sent a letter to Robert Dudley saying, "This, you got to do this, and you got to do this for your health, to get better," and all the rest of it. And so she felt that she probably was the best person to keep an eye on Catherine and ensure that she got better. And she was also had her own doctors there looking after her. Elizabeth was actually very close to, as in a room very near where Catherine was, but that didn't prevent Catherine from dying.
In death, there is evidence which, again, points to Elizabeth viewing Catherine and recognising Catherine as a half-sister rather than a cousin. And can you explain what I mean about that, in particular with funeral arrangements in particular?
She gave Catherine a royal send-off. She actually had the funeral at Westminster Abbey, and she spent a lot of money on that funeral. And as we know of Elizabeth, she was very, very cautious with what she spent out on those sort of things, anything really. She was a good money manager, was Elizabeth, like her grandfather, Edward VII. But she spent a lot of money, and it was her brother, Henry Carey, also had an elaborate funeral that also raised eyebrows as well, which is another thing that made me sort of think, yes, maybe she also saw Henry as her half-brother. But yes, Catherine's funeral was a really, really full-on affair.
So was it more lavish than other Careys? Is there something about this funeral that makes you go, that is...
Yes, exactly. And also the actual funeral records. So there's a, where she is actually situated. Her body is not actually at Westminster. It's actually at the church at Rotherford's Grave with her husband. But her tomb, the tomb is at Westminster, and then there's the records that actually sort of that they found that record all these royal names, and then we've got Catherine Carey there, and there's a poem that was written, a very, very elaborate poem about her passing as well, and so she was obviously regarded with great respect and known to be greatly important to Elizabeth by others as well.
So my final question for you is, what do you believe was Catherine Carey's legacy?
It's not what, but a who. I don't believe that Elizabeth, in those first 10 years of Elizabeth's reign, everyone was gambling on Elizabeth toppling off the throne. If Elizabeth hadn't had a group of women like Catherine around her, that circle of women to support her, give her the emotional support as well as everything else, I don't believe that Elizabeth would have remained on the throne as she did, because she needed those women, and also she needed the women that she could trust, that she knew that loved her, that could give her that emotional, because, she would have been, Elizabeth would have been happy to marry, maybe, if she could give herself to someone that she could trust and know that it wouldn't impact on her kingdom. And all of us are human. We all need to have these emotional supports. And Catherine was one of the people that did give her that emotional support and what was necessary. And also was one of those people who were able to filter to Elizabeth what was going on in her court, because she was really reliant on those women to bring to her information that she needed to make her rule successful. So anyway, so that's Catherine's legacy, is that the fact that we have a queen that stayed on the throne for 44 years. Catherine was there for the first 10 years, which was really those really difficult years.
That's a perfect answer. And, and also the King Charles III is descended from Catherine Carey in one way or another.
I know. And his sons are descended from both branches of the...
Yes, because Diana's, yeah.
So they get a double dose.
Exactly.
They get a double dose of Boleyn bullet.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on and having a chat about Catherine and her story. It's been a real thrill. So where can people find you? Are you on social media?
I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Blue Sky, which I'm learning to use. Anytime. I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you. Yes, it's out, so yeah.
All right. Thank you, Adam.
That brings us to the end of this week's episode of the Tudor Chess Podcast. My thanks to Wendy Dunn for coming on to discuss the life of Catherine Carey with me. Next week, I'm going to be chatting to Jackson Van Uden all about Catherine of Aragon and the upcoming Catherine of Aragon Festival, which is taking place in January and that my company, Simply Tudor Tours, is sponsoring. Join me next Thursday to hear all about it. Thank you again for listening to the Tudor Chess Podcast, and speak soon.